Let's take a look at the new and improved depth of field effect in Lumion 6. So depth of field really comes in handy when you have a situation where you want your context buildings to kind of blur out in the background and really keep the focus on your proposed architecture. So we use this project in the blog post for 3D model types for designers. And so this is a condoc model. It's really modeled to a level of detail where there's depth and ins and outs and window frames and reveals. So that really starts to cast shadows and bring a lot of realism. These other context buildings are what are called photo textured models. So these are kind of simple paper models where we fold the photograph. I say paper model, it's like you took a photograph and kind of folded around this 3D model in order to give the illusion of a completed model. But it really gives the sense of scale and the sense of architectural style for the context. So it really works well for context buildings, but you wouldn't really want to keep that in the foreground. And also when these photo textured models are in the background, it's kind of nice to use that depth of field effect to just blur them out a bit. So let's take a look at how this new depth of field effect in Lumion 6 helps us with that. So we'll head over to our photo mode, and in photo mode I already have a camera view set up. This was a real project we worked on. And over here you can see we've got our depth of field. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this, and that way we can go and add the effect. I'll click on new effect, and then you can see depth of field. I'll click on that, and this is going to come in with our default settings. Now I will say that in previous versions of Lumion, depth of field was a bit of a crapshoot. It was a little difficult I found it difficult to get to a predictable result and really know how I'm getting to that result. I never had a problem figuring out, getting it to a desired result, but I didn't really know what I was doing that got me there. I understood the focus distance, and there's also, I think, isolate background and f-stop, and it was just a blend of terminology and sliders that didn't make a ton of sense to me, whereas I think the new depth of field does make sense to me. So we've got the amount of depth of field comes in at a level of 5. Foreground, background. My understanding of that is it just kind of sliding towards the foreground or the background, whatever you want in focus. It comes in with a default setting of 0.5 right in the middle. Your focus distance is a plane in front of the camera, and the further away the focus distance is, that's basically where the blur starts. You might even say that the foreground background slider kind of picks which side of the plane the blur is going to be on. So, and then the sharp area size, that kind of is like if there's like a little focal point here, and then you can make that bigger, the actual clearness of the sharp area, and then the shape of the sharp area is these guys here. So we'll kind of run through these settings and look at what those mean and really try and pinpoint what's happening. So all right, so if I want to just dial up, let's just say there's more depth of field. It makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on when you dial it up and kind of get a dramatic effect. So we've got a ton of depth of field happening there. And now if I were to take my focus distance and slide that, you can see that plane kind of going back and kind of like, choosing where the focal point is going to be. So is the focal point way up front so everything's out of focus? Or as I slide back, you'll see like our biker come in to focus. And then as I keep going, the building comes into focus, the trees, and then it just kind of heads back. So then, so really, you got to kind of slide that around and get things in focus where you want it. And then it appears to me that like the foreground, background, you can kind of pick like, do I want to isolate the background and the foreground's out? Or if I isolate the foreground and the biker, now he's in focus. So it's just kind of easiest to experiment with rather drastic moves at first and then kind of dial those in. All right, so then the sharp area disk size, let's just kind of get like a realistic, like maybe something like maybe the amount should drop. And that's kind of realistic. And then our sharp area disk size, you can see that as I expand and contract that, those trees and everything kind of starts to become sharp. So it's really changing the shape of it. And let's see, sharp area. So usually you can kind of see like a little line where that effect is starting to grow and shrink. But pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you pick one of these kind of funky shapes, and then you slide the sharp area size, and that makes that basically that point either bigger or smaller of focus. That'd probably be the best way to say it. The focal point being the size of it and the shape of it. All right, then the other big addition here is the autofocus. So what that does is it takes this focus distance setting out of effect. So we'll just click on the autofocus and click on the edit tool. Now, what I can do is click anywhere on the geometry and make that my focal point. So I'll just click like right here on these letters or these numbers and say OK. And now it sets my focus distance so that this is what's in focus. And now I can dial up the amount, and you can see that my building is in focus, this corner is, and everything out here is really tapering off. And maybe that's pretty drastic, but that's kind of what we're up to today is really seeing how this works. So all right, so keep in mind that the autofocus being on is going to force your focus distance. So if I were to slide that over here, it snaps back to where it is on the autofocus because that autofocus is turned on. So that's kind of eliminates the ability to slide with that. So if you want to change that, you go back to edit and say, nah, I think I really wanted it, over on maybe on the biker. So we'll make him the focus point. And so now he's the focus point and everything else is kind of blurring out. So that's how you use the new depth of field tool. I find it to be much more predictable, really slick with these new different disc shapes and how you can get these different effects. Sharp area size is pretty cool. So those are kind of some new additions. So let's go in and do a little bit more of an advanced kind of quick tutorial in the movie mode. So we'll go to movie mode and let's make a depth of field that animates. So we'll go to record. And let me first just kind of set up a camera view. So let's see, I'm going to go over here and let's just say that we want to focus, just kind of do like a more cinematic shot. So maybe if I kind of scoot over here and let's just say we're going to start right here and we're going to have the cars drastically in focus for the beginning of the shot. And then we're going to kind of pan this way and up until we get like the whole building. And then at this point, we really want the cars to be out of focus. Maybe I need a little wider frame of view there. Like that. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, and then I think I dial it up. Whenever I'm creating animations, I think a slower animation is almost always better. So let's hit play and just see what that looks like. All right, so you can imagine that what we want to do is when I start here, I want the building way out of focus and I want my cars to be really in focus and nice and sharp. And then I'm going to start moving up like this. And maybe when I get to here, I want the depth of field to start changing. I want the building to come into focus here. And then when I get to about right here, I want the building completely in focus. And then as I finish the shot, everything, the building is the highlight of my animation. All right, so to do that, we'll go over to our effects, add a new effect, and let's add that depth of field to our animation. And now at this point, we can go to, now we can't use autofocus. And you can use it in animation, but if we're going to be tweening, basically creating keyframes for our focus distance, we are not able to use that autofocus feature. So just keep that in mind. I mean, if you're just doing one depth of field point of view in this animation, you could certainly use that, but we're going to do several, or two. So no big deal, though. It's pretty easy to use. We'll go to our amount, and let's dial that up, and then let's adjust our focus distance. So we'll bring that focus distance way towards the camera. Keep in mind, you can hold Shift as you're adjusting these, and that gives you the ability to kind of make a little bit more drastic moves. So let's see, as I come to the front, everything's blurred, and then I start moving to the right. Things are starting to come into focus. So there's my car coming into focus. And so like right about there, I think. And then let's dial down the amount, maybe No, want that to be pretty high. And then I want to focus on the, let's see, we want to focus on the foreground here, like that. So it seems like the drastic moves are the easiest way to really understand what's happening. And then you just kind of back it off and then, you know, to make your subtle adjustments. So like right there, my cars are drastically in focus and the background is really out of focus. So that's kind of a cool way to start here. All right. So you can see that we're, we start the animation, everything's in focus, we get to about right here, and this is where I want my keyframes to kick in. So I've set my point in the timeline there, and I'll go ahead and add keyframes. And it's probably safe just to add keyframes for everything, like that. All right, so now that way, these settings are going to maintain up until this point. Now, from here moving forward, as I'm moving up like this, and then to about right here, I want things to start changing. I want the building to come into focus, and when I get to this point, it should be completely in focus. So over here, I'm going to add my keyframes by clicking on these little squiggles like that. And now I'm going to change my focus distance to move back like that. And let's see, can we get our foreground background to kind of blur? Yeah, so as I switch it back, you can see that my cars start to become out of focus. So it's kind of like that, you know, flip-flops on us, like that. That looks pretty good. All right, and then as we finish the shot, the cars are out of focus, and there we finish. All right, so let's see the whole thing. Cars are in focus, they start to move out of focus, and the building comes into frame. So you can see it kind of getting clearer as we go. So you can use the depth of field effect to make these more cinematic shots, really dial up your presentations. Keep in mind that subtle little things like this really do dial up an animation. I mean, if you're just doing like a helicopter flyover, it gets pretty boring. If you really just take a little bit of time and add some flair to your animations with these depth of field and some of these other effects, you can really dial them up. So, and also I think a huge tip is that slower is better. So whenever you're creating animations, make sure you add a few seconds to each clip. Lumion renders so fast, you can afford to render it, and really the slower the better. It just feels better as you're flying through a space and gives your audience a chance to really keep up with it and understand what's going on. So anyway, that's the Lumion 6 all new and improved depth of field. Take a spin on that and hope it works out for you, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.